Well, viewers, you're lucky. You get a second video from me within a week, and it's all because this country is falling apart. Last video you saw me going through the Black Lives Matter protests going on throughout London. Well, they just couldn't stop. They did some things much worse that I just feel I have to go through because I'm very angry about this. So, as you saw in the last video, since Black Lives Matter were causing an awful lot of vandalism to basically things in London that symbolise what the country's about, so the cenotaph, because we sacrificed our lives to defeat European expansionist powers, and there was graffiti all over the statues of Parliament Square, which are symbols of freedom. As you can see in this clip, quite a few people didn't want this to happen again, so they stood in front of it to defend it. Yes, this is a very good idea if you want to defend your statues. Just stand in front of it and don't let anyone with any spray paint or placards get near it. These statues are not to be vandalised, they are there as a symbol of British history and British liberty. Especially Churchill, for God's sake, he only went and fought in the greatest war we've ever fought in. Unfortunately, the Metropolitan Police had different ideas. Take a look at this clip. Yes, the Metropolitan Police thought it would be a very good idea to remove these people simply standing there defending the statue of Churchill, someone I imagine they admire very much. Like myself, in fact. However, no, they gave the crowd exactly what they wanted. They removed the defenders of Churchill, while the people around them were shouting racist scum. Of course, there is no evidence that these people are actually racist, all they were simply doing was defending a symbol to their country, which I'm sure these people would say is a racist country, but as has gone over time and time again, the stats simply do not bear that out, and public attitude simply does not bear that out. So, naturally, exactly what you imagine happened to that statue happened. I mean, it's a tiny clip, but you get the idea. They put placards all over the statue of Winston Churchill. They spray painted Winston Churchill as a racist on the base of the Churchill statue. Now, these people call everyone racist, even when they are clearly so anti-racist it's embarrassing. Look at the UK police. They aren't racist at all towards black people. In fact, there is evidence to show that they give them preferential treatment, possibly at the risk of being called racist, and they'd rather not be called racist. So they go very far the other way, giving preferential treatment to people who are not white, and worse treatment to those who are white, and especially working class. So from this alone, normies are just gonna think that this doesn't fly anyway, because I know quite a lot of normies that are getting quite radicalised about this. My parents, for an example, they don't understand why the water cannons weren't out clearing up the protesters who are clearly causing criminal damage. However, since the police clearly didn't do their job, we had some Chad Anglos walking in and doing the job for them. Yep, the absolute Chad went in and did the unthinkable, generally when you're surrounded by a crowd like that. He just went in, took down all the signs, was clearly pissed off with them, kicked the signs away, and was trying to give Winston the respect he absolutely deserves. However, what are the things shouted at him? Racist, you're a racist, shame on you racist, things like that, while the police chase after him, presumably to arrest him, I'm not sure. But why they aren't stopping any of the people who were spray painting the monument, why they weren't stopping people climbing up on the statue and taping their placards onto it and generally causing mayhem on the streets again? I do not know. But it's very telling that they won't go after those people and go after the people trying to, well, stop the criminal damage. As I was saying in the last video, Sadiq Khan and Chris Dick, you both need to lose your jobs. You are not protecting the City of London from its criminals or punishing said criminals correctly. You've got to realise how bad these images look, and we are not even talking about the epidemic of knife crime on the streets of London. For all these reasons, you have to go, and we need to get competent people in. But for some goddamn reason, they just keep voting Sadiq Khan in, and they'll probably vote him in again. I say for some reason, but don't get me wrong, I'm aware it's because native Brits no longer really want to live in London. And things we're seeing on the streets is only going to make that worse. But anyway, we need a bit of a white pill. So here are a few clips and images of people who are actually doing their part to save Winston's memory.
Well, I'll let you explain, maybe you know. Yeah, so we're here because as much as we understand the protests and everything that's going on, defacing a national icon is just that one step too far. Like, yes, make the signs, make the protests, but leave everything else out of it, because it's just more work for the police, it's more work for everyone else, and it's, at the end of the day, you've done it, yet you have to pay for it. So we're just giving our bit back to everyone else as much as we can.
Protest as much as you like, protest about whatever you want. That's absolutely fine, but there are ways that you don't do it, you know. Desecrating a war memorial, a statue, things like that, it doesn't help you, people just turn against you, it's very disrespectful. And to someone like Churchill, who fought, you know, the biggest racist ever, I think it's extremely bad. So the least I can do, someone who's done so much for me, for my parents, my grandparents, for everyone, for this country, is come and take off some of the graffiti.
Yeah, I'm generally in full agreement with these lads. I don't think any of them want to explicitly say they're against Black Lives Matter, because saying that on live television or it going out to the nation, I mean, that's just asking to be doxxed and have people around at your house having a go at you. But they are absolutely doing their part, as they should be, in cleaning up as much of Churchill as they can. And obviously, because it's spray paint, it's actually a pain to get off. So we also have this picture of Mayor Tusi, someone who I assume is from Indian or Pakistani descent. And he is also doing his part in cleaning up the rubbish that Black Lives Matter left and helping clean up the statue of Churchill. So I guess that just goes to show that if you are going to come and assimilate, do come and assimilate, and don't spit on all of our war memorials and the statues of those who mean a lot to our country. And even that still wasn't enough to clean the graffiti off, because it is just that much of a pain in the arse to get off. Here is a video of a woman late at night trying to clean off the graffiti left by Black Lives Matter.
How dare they disrespect the man that gave us freedom in Europe? Jesus Christ. These guys do not know what a hard life is. Absolute nonsense.
So as you can see, Churchill means a lot to people who really feel a part of Britain. All the arguments given for cleaning the statue is he defended liberty, beat the Nazis back who are invading force all over Europe and eventually probably Britain, and he seems to basically be the centre of the current British mythos, which I'm totally for. He is absolutely one of the best prime ministers we've had, and defacing that statue, it really does just break my heart. But even all this work from all the local people wasn't enough. They had to get an official cleaner in, who was black, to clean off the rest of the statue with professional gear. And this is just the consequence of Black Lives Matter's narcissism. They don't care who's hurt, they don't care what they deface, they do not care about any of the consequences of their actions. They just want power. And if people don't care about consequences of their petty actions, they are sure as shit not going to care about the consequences of their large actions when they have the power. And if defacing Churchill isn't enough for you, let's take a look at what happened in Bristol. Now, if you're a left-wing activist, you may have a similar reaction to MP Nadia Witomi. I celebrate these acts of resistance. We need a movement that will tear down systematic racism and the slave owner statues that symbolise it, and we need to win a government that will be on the side of this movement. Shut the fuck up, you absolute cunt. You have been taken in, or your parents have, I don't know, but you or your parents have been taken in by a country that tore down systematic racism. It made it impossible throughout the Atlantic, and that was after this guy had died. It was over a century after Colston had died, and you're blaming him for the sins of that? You do realise every country in the world was involved in the slave trade, right? Every single country. There hasn't been a country on earth that hasn't been involved in slavery. Britain was just the first one to make it impossible on a large scale like this. They also completely ignore the fact that Bristol wouldn't be the city it is today without Colston. The reason so much of the city is named after him, and there are statues of him all around, is because of his philanthropy. He set up many charitable organisations throughout the city, some of which still stand today, and when he died in his will, all his money went to charity. It's not because of his involvement in the slave trade. People have not mythologised that part of him. They've tried to put it out of the myth because it is obviously a evil. And this is something that happens with absolutely every single figure in history. You'll look at communists and they'll think Marx and Engels are these mythological creatures and they didn't do a single thing wrong, which isn't true because Marx raped his maid and left her with a baby, and Engels actually owned a bloody factory in Manchester and didn't treat his poor the way he said he would in the Communist Manifesto. These people were hypocrites, and even by their own standards, were complete evil. I mean, I'd say if these people read On the Jewish Question by Karl Marx, but they're all Labour supporters as well, so they probably actually want anti-Semitism. Anyway, I've made my point about hypocrisy and why we should keep statues, so I'm going to carry on with some videos and images from Bristol. Yes, these animals are screeching and cheering because they are throwing the memory of a dead man into the icy depths of the Bristol River. They do not actually care about history of Western men of the past. They only see them as evil. They will rationalise everything they do as they fight against evil. The problem is that when you are fighting a historical figure, unlike people who tore down statues in Soviet Russia and of Saddam Hussein in Iraq, they were fighting a current symbol and a man who was very much alive anyway or died within living memory. But the fact that they have to find a white supremacist from over 300 years ago says quite a lot, one, about the country we live in now, that clearly they can't find any more recent examples, and two, that their fight on history is completely irrational. What have they achieved by this? What white supremacy have they destroyed with this? The memory of someone who was involved in a slave trade? I hope they understand that people in Africa and chieftains of tribes in Africa were the ones who sold us those slaves. I hope they realise that Sierra Leone is literally called Freetown because of the British work in ending the slave trade. But again, these people do not care about history, they only mean to destroy it. And they mean to replace it with images like this. They think this is a revolution. They're a pair of images of just absolute cack everywhere that don't say anything. White silence is violence. Fuck the system. Colour is not a crime. These don't mean anything. These are not revolutionary placards. These are the placards of people with nothing to say and who have no moral backbone. But you may be asking, as you were in London, where the hell are the police in all this? Why have they done absolutely nothing to protect public property and the symbol of their city? Well, here's the Chief of Police.
I want to speak to you about the policing of the protest in Bristol over the weekend. We went to lengths before the protest to caution people against attending because of the risk of spreading COVID. But as expected, people turned up, and there was a crowd of over 10,000. Midway through the protest, we saw CCTV images in our control room of people, protesters, on top of the Colston statue. Within 2 minutes, that statue had been pulled down. We had deployed officers to respond, to take appropriate action, but the commanders on the ground made the decision that to intervene, to arrest suspects, would likely to lead to injuries to suspects, injuries to officers, people who were not involved in damaging property being drawn into a very violent confrontation with the police that could have had serious ramifications for the city of Bristol and beyond. Can you imagine scenes of police in Bristol fighting with protesters who were damaging the image, the statue of a man who is reputed to have gathered much of his fortune through the slave trade? I think there would have been very serious implications. And whilst I certainly do not condone crime or damage of any sort, I fully support the actions of my officers. They responded with common sense, sound judgment, and in the best interest of public safety.
Oh no, it would look bad for the police if they arrest black people for tearing. They weren't even all black. Most of those people were white for a start. But I'd have to organise my thoughts because I'm so angry here. First things first. Things about the slave trade. I step over. I could not give a shit how he made his fortune. It was legal at the time and not seen as immoral. We cannot help that. That is just a product of its time. And as said before, he initially bought the slaves of black Africans. What a racist arsehole giving his money to black Africans. Secondly, you're worried about ramifications of what it looks like to arrest people committing crimes? Do you understand how stupid this looks to the rest of us? I mean, I'm going to go through it later, but normies and gammons are not happy with the way you are behaving. As I said before, my mother, who usually doesn't get too involved with these things, was getting rather angry, saying why are these protesters not being broken up with something like water cannons? The normies are getting fed up with your spinelessness. Fix it now, or you will see mobs in the street trying to act like vigilantes. I'd say imagine how that looks, but you don't care. You care too much about your image of being anti-racist, which it ironically turns out makes you into racist against white people. Anyway, unfortunately, the problem isn't just with the police. This is what the Mayor of Bristol had to say when interviewed about it.
I'm sure that lots of our viewers, when they see the image of that statue being pulled down by ropes, rolled to the edge of the water and then lobbed in, will have very strong views. What were your views when you saw that happening?
Well, as I've been sharing, I clearly, as an elected politician, cannot condone criminal damage. And I've been very clear throughout that I'm very concerned about mass gatherings in the middle of a pandemic. And I've been making those views known. But I can't pretend, as the son of Jamaican migrant myself, that the presence of that statue to a slave trader in the middle of the city was anything other than a personal affront to me and people like me.
Why was it not taken down before now then, sir?
Well, that's a good question. It's been debated for a very long time, but there's a couple of bits of world reality that we have to grapple with. One is when I came in the middle of Brexit, in the middle of austerity, with a horrific financial situation, the pathway to race equality was not necessarily in taking down that statue. It wasn't the top of my list of priorities. And secondly, I'm Europe's first directly elected black mayor, apparently. If I turn up after hundreds of years of political rule and I suddenly start taking down those symbols in the middle of Brexit, you'd be writing a whole different kind of story about what black leadership means. So my job was to get on with the business of housing, domestic violence, child hunger, poverty, joblessness, and all those other things I've been getting on with. As for the administrations that went before me, you'd have to ask them that question.
Well, oddly enough, they'd probably say the exact same thing. Oh, we had other jobs to do, etc., etc. Yeah, this is the thing. People don't really care about this statue, and they didn't really care about this statue until Black Lives Matter came along, took the mob rule, and brought it down and threw it in the river. And if the people of Bristol wanted it taken down, fine. Have an election of some sort, or have a councillor who says, I'm going to take down this statue if you vote for me, and then vote them in. There are ways you can take down this statue legally. And anyway, his pathetic excuse of, yeah, well, I'm descended from Jamaica. Like, okay, sure, he probably enslaved some of your ancestors. But again, that's 300 years ago. There is absolutely no one you know who was a slave. I mean, for God's sake, yes, your ancestors probably got their freedom. Oh, guess what? Who did they get it from? Oh, the British. And now you're free enough to come to England and tell us that our history is evil, essentially. Like, why do we free you if you're just going to come along and do that? I mean, obviously because freeing slaves is the morally good thing to do. But why do we have to put up with people like you who will use it as any excuse to get ahead and use it as any excuse to damage our symbols and our history? Tell me, why should we put up with it? I mean, honestly, Labour's reaction to this has just been insane. I mean, just take a look at this clip of Annalise Dodds. She's out of her mind.
You talk about, first of all, what happened really in Bristol. And this is from Sajid Javid. He said, I grew up in Bristol. I detest how Edward Colston profited from the slave trade, but this is not OK. If Bristolians want to remove a monument, it should be done democratically, not by criminal damage. What's your reaction to that?
Well, as I just said, you know, vandalism is not acceptable, but let's look into why that happened. People had called, as I just said, for many years for that statue to be removed. It was a visible symbol of slavery. Nothing had happened. So I will never condone vandalism, but really we need to understand why that action was taken and try and do something about the discrimination that so many people in our society still feel. And it's still, sadly, very, very visible. It's still all around us. Let's try and understand that and not only condemn and shift this into a process of division between different groups of people. As I said, we really can't afford that at a time of a global pandemic. We couldn't afford it at any time, but particularly not now.
Yes, this is how they excuse this shit. It's the old, oh, I do believe in free speech, but it's like, oh yeah, no, I condone vandalism. But, you know, let's look at this, you know. Some people are racist in society. Oh, are they? Well, again, the stats show that we are one of the least racist societies in the world. If this country is the symbol of racism, then you're not looking anywhere else. The other thing I'd like to mention is, again, oh, it was a symbol of slavery. Oh, we've had loads of letters to get rid of it. Yes, but again, that's not a reason for the Vandals to throw it in the river. I mean, seriously, there's a statue of Engels in Manchester. Can I just go off and throw that in the canal there? Am I allowed to do that now because I'm personally offended at the atrocities of communism? I mean, honestly, this is what Labour seem to want, just complete civil disobedience for the self-righteous mob. Why they want that, I don't know. They just seem to absolutely hate Britain to its core. Anyway, while I'm on an angry roll, here's some Sadiq Khan.
I think our Home Secretary and our Prime Minister should try and walk in the shoes of a black person in Bristol who on a daily basis sees somebody commemorated, celebrated, who was a slaver, who was responsible for their ancestors being enslaved, responsible for bringing to this country 84,000 slaves and around the world and throwing overboard 20,000 innocent black women and children. And I find the lack of empathy from our Prime Minister and our Home Secretary breathtaking.
Are you serious, Sadiq? You're using arguments of people that lived and died 3 centuries ago as a reason to now desecrate a statue of a man who was being remembered not for his hand in the slave trade, but the good he did for Britain. I mean, if our moral standard now is no statues of anyone who was involved in the slave trade in any way, that is a baseline that no one from before the 19th century can attest to. Everyone was involved in it in some way. And this is what I mean. They want to completely get rid of any sort of history we had. And they will always use that as an excuse. They will completely ignore the good and only focus on the bad. And these arguments come up all the time with the Empire as well. They'll never talk about how we made slavery impossible. They'll never talk about the good we did for these countries. They'll only talk about the massacres we had in, you know, think about it. 3 centuries of rule in, say, India. And we had, what? A few massacres? It was barely a massacre a century. But this is what they bloody do. They only focus on the bad. And the reason they do that is because it's the only way they can justify their evil. And that's not Sadiq Khan's only reaction to this. And this is from The Times. Black Lives Matter. Sadiq Khan commission to review diversity of London statues. I just want to end my life. A new commission will review statues, monuments and street names across London to ensure that they reflect the city's diversity. Presumably they mean modern diversity and not the diversity of all of British history. which I would like to point out to my audience will have been 99% white. The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, announced the move this morning, days after the statue of Edward Colston, a 17th century slave trader and philanthropist, and basically the man who made every charity in Bristol at the time, was pulled down in Bristol by Black Lives Matter protesters. Protesters also added graffiti to memorials to the wartime Prime Minister Winston Churchill and the Indian politician Mahatma Gandhi, saying they were racist, while campaigners have called for the removal of a number of other statues, including to Robert Clive, 1st Baron Clive, a founder of the British Empire. This shit needs to be stepped over. Sean Bailey would not allow for this. Sean Bailey would not take diversity seriously enough to remove statues of important people from our history and replace them with God knows what Sadiq Khan's going to replace them with. According to Mr. Khan's office, the Commission for Diversity in the Public Realm will be wide in scope, considering statues, murals, street names, and other memorials. It doesn't give a shit about history. It's a cultural revolution. Diversity must overarch absolutely everything in life. You know, you've got a street name called Baker Street or something. Oh no, that should be called Adewale Street or something like that. I don't know. Some other African name. I'm sorry, Sadiq, this isn't an African country. We are Britain. We have British names for our streets. And yes, even our cul-de-sacs, even though that's a French word. We have ancient influence from France, not so much from Africa, I'm afraid, and that ain't going to change anytime soon. It will focus on increasing representation among Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities, women, LGBTQ communities, and disability groups. Fuck these groups, Mr. Khan. These groups mean nothing to me. Being white doesn't mean anything to me. Being a man and straight doesn't mean anything to me. What matters to me is, are these things representing Britain? And if they are, that's fine with me. But if you're just going to put them in there for diversity points, and they are anti-British to some extent, no, I want them out of my bloody country. I don't want them memorialised in statue form in my country. A spokesman said that London was one of the most diverse cities in the world, with more than 300 languages spoken every day, yet statues, plaques and street names largely reflect Victorian Britain, as highlighted by recent Black Lives Matter protests. Oh, okay, I see now. So we just have to delete our history because, you know, we now have a majority not white London. Is that what you're saying? So we've basically been invaded. That is basically what you're saying. So when the British go over and colonise, I don't know, India or China, and then they start naming a load of places in English, and they start bringing in the culture, and they say, yeah, we have to delete your history. Yeah, that's wrong. Oh, but you do it in Britain. No, that's fine. That's fine. We deserve it. You know, the sins of our father, they apply to us. I mean, honestly, this shit's making me so angry. I mean, honestly, I've had enough of this article. You get the idea of it. But seriously, think about it. Sadiq Khan and Chrisella Dick have overlooked terrible Black Lives Matter violence, as we saw over the weekend. They are desecrating our statues. They are allowing kids around with knives to stab each other. 73% or something like that of the perpetrators of knife crime are black, and just over half of the victims are black. But where are their priorities? Their priorities are here. Their priorities are to erase British culture, erase the good that British culture has done for Britain and the world, and instead replace it with some dog shit diversity. What do we have to show for that? There's less white people about. Oh, that's great. Oh, there's more gays about. Oh, that's fantastic. Oh, there are women in boardrooms. Like, oh my god, is this actually helping anyone? Like, who is this? All this stuff actually helping? Because the problem is, as with all the stuff to do with diversity, all it does is have to bring the best of us down. It has to bring the rest of us down to the basic level of quote-unquote equality. It's just basic cultural Marxism. And I swear to God, if this stuff continues, you're probably going to see some sort of rioting in the streets. And this time it will be the self-righteous gammons who are fighting against the semi-imperialist Sadiq Khan and his diversity goose steppers. Anyway, hopefully that wasn't too hyperbolic for you. That's everything I had for you today. So as usual, thank you very much for watching. Defend your statues, defend your history, defend your culture. And until next time, as usual, goodbye.